I saw this Bernie Sanders email. It's personally from Bernie to this guy. No one else got it. Dear Brent, see, that's how you know. Tough times. The American people understand that our economic and political systems are rigged. They know that the very rich get much richer, while almost everyone else becomes poorer. They know that we are moving rapidly into an oligarchic form of society. The Democrats ran a campaign protecting the status quo and tinkering around the edges. Trump and the Republicans campaigned on change and on smashing the existing order. Not surprisingly, the Republicans won. Unfortunately, the change Republicans will bring about will make a bad situation worse, and a society of gross inequality even more unequal, more unjust, and more bigoted. And I think what a lot of Republicans are going to have to grow up and learn, are going to have to grow up and understand, is that a lot of the ways Trump is going to change things aren't even novel. All of the superficial reactionary stuff, like trans people who have done you no harm, now their lives are worse. Sure, okay. Phenomenal, well done, how transformative, you know? Trans people, a group who had been hurting no one and fundamentally changing essentially nothing about one's day-to-day life, briefly enjoyed a period of time during which they were more comfortable, and now you will make them uncomfortable. Wow. Well done. But fundamentally, what's going to change? The underlying changes, the underlying processes, everything's going to stay the same. Much the same as it did in the first Trump term. Like, what really changed in between Obama's second term, like from the end of Obama's second term to the end of Trump's term? Assume that COVID didn't happen. What really changed? If you take a look at basically every line, every tracker, inflation, unemployment, job availability, whatever else, you'll find that essentially during the Trump administration, nothing changed. He campaigned on transformative change there as well. Most of what he did was inept, and he occasionally, there was deregulation. But apart from that, the process was pretty much the same. A lot of people say they were doing better back in 2020, and we'll be charitable and say, like, January 1st, 2020, before COVID hit, because then things really got wacky. But if you go back to the beginning of 2020, January 1st, what was different? Bleeding money away in the Middle East, hard to find a job, jobs didn't pay enough, people were living paycheck to paycheck, urban areas continued to decay, homelessness epidemic continued to go on the rise, drug deaths continue to rise. After Trump, after Obama, same damn thing. Now the processes have continued. Things are a little bit worse in most respects now than they were then, with the exception, I guess, of the overall economy, because the goal here is to keep the line going up. When are you going to figure it out? Will the Democratic leadership learn the lessons of their defeat and create a party that stands with the working class and is prepared to take on the enormously powerful special interests that dominate our economy, our media, and our political life? Highly unlikely. They are much too wedded to the billionaires and corporate interests that fund their campaigns. Given that reality, where do we go from here? That is the very serious question that needs a lot of discussion in the coming weeks and months. How do we expand our efforts to build a multiracial, multi-generational working class movement? This is one of the reasons why right-wingers have a difficult time arguing against Bernie Sanders. It's because, especially since Donald Trump, let me be clear, if Bernie Sanders ran for president back in 2004, alongside like Kerry, he would have gotten eaten alive. The economy was generally strong. People were nowhere near as critical of those in power, of big business, of the government in general, so on and so forth. There was a lot more like reflexive patriotism because, 9/11 happened. A lot of what Bernie said would have gotten shot down because back then, being the president meant admitting to being the administrator of the status quo. In the modern era, however, Republicans have a tough time arguing against this because he is an authentic advocate for the systemic change they pretend to care about. Republicans will tell you that they're about to mix things up for real this time, and what they mean by that is they're going to talk about trans people in bathrooms a lot. They won't even touch on race issues. They're not even like racist enough to authentically campaign on it. You know what I mean? A lot of people who support Donald Trump and the Republicans don't really like black people that much. Republicans don't really touch on that because there's not much electoral viability. Donald Trump campaigned on, revoking Roe v. Wade, which he did through his Supreme Court picks. And now he pretends that he didn't. He says he wanted to throw it back to the states. when like he says everyone wanted him to throw it back to the states, which is just not true. And the states are all overturning abortion bans, even Republican states. So like, what does Donald Trump actually believe in? Again, these are rhetorical questions. If you watch my videos, you probably know how I feel about this. It's just important to understand that more and more so even than before, because I'd be more willing to bet in Henry Ford's authentic racism and anti-Semitism than I would in Donald Trump's. All of these cultural positions are disingenuously held because they know you won't vote for a guy who just flat out says we're here to make the rich richer and nothing else. Republicans have a hard time attacking Bernie Sanders because he is an authentic representation of what they inauthentically campaign on. They are much too wedded to the billionaires and corporate interests that fund their campaigns. Given that reality, where do we go from here? That is the very serious question that needs a lot of discussion in the coming weeks and months. How do we expand our efforts to build a multiracial, multi-generational working class movement? How do we create a 50-state environment, not politics based on the electoral college and battlefield states, or battleground, excuse me. How do we deal with Citizens United and the ability of billionaires to buy elections? How do we recruit more working class candidates for office at all levels of government? Should we be supporting independent candidates who are prepared to take on both parties? How do we better support union organizing? How do we put together listening sessions around the country that intentionally seek input from people who did not vote for Democrats in the past election? All right, that's actually quite tiring for my jaw, so I'm going to stop here. How do we best use social media to build our movement and combat the lies and disinformation coming from the billionaire class and right-wing media? How do we build sustainable and long-term issue-based organizing structures that live beyond individual campaigns? These are some of the political questions that, together, we need to address, and it is absolutely critical that you make your voice heard during this process. Not me, us, that is the only way forward in solidarity, Bernie Sanders. So what it sounds like to me is that Bernie Sanders, for the most part, has given up on the Democrats, which isn't a new position. He's been an independent for a long time, but he's being very openly critical of Democrats, not only for their performance, but their ability to shift and change and meet the needs of the American people. I agree with him. Yeah, I do too. It's unfortunate. I'm not going to become an anti-electoralist or anything. I'm sticking to that gun. But man, oh man. Yeah, I don't know if it's even possible to, I don't even know if it's possible to build a third party right now because Americans kind of like overwhelmingly rejected them in the most recent election cycle. Like there were a bunch of proposed changes to state policy with regard to first past the post or open primaries or whatever else, and they were largely rejected. You have to understand that to the average American, like they can't conceive of anything outside the party duopoly. That's the point of the party duopoly. The point is to not just to be locked in on those two, but to have the expanse of your imagination limited to just the tiny amount that you're provided. You know, you lose the ability to look outside of it. Yeah, here we go. Voters rejected historic election reforms across the U.S. despite more than $100 million push. 2 weeks before Election Day, activists from across the country gathered for an online rally heralding the historic number of state ballot initiatives seeking to change the way people vote. Hopes were high voters would ditch traditional partisan primaries and embrace ballots with more candidate choices. Instead, the election reform movement lost almost everywhere it appeared on a statewide ballot. It turns out in retrospect we weren't yet ready for prime time, said John Optic? Maybe. President of the advocacy group Open Primaries, which organized the rally. In Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, and South Dakota, voters rejected either ranked choice voting, open primaries, or a combination of both. And they barely kept it in Alaska. Barely kept it in Alaska. I mean, that like the thinnest of margins. I have zero hope for the median voter. Don't be a buffoon. This isn't about like the median voter or anything like that. In America, we have literally no living memory of a third party candidate doing anything meaningful except steal elections. The closest we have is Bernie, but he ran as a Democrat back in 2016 and 2020, you know? Like this is like completely outside of the range of knowledge and interest for the average American. And frankly, I think that something like this is only really ever going to be possible if it's fielded as a major issue by a major party, presumably the Democrats. Some people will get really like negative about this, but like, yeah, nuts, you're correct. The average American doesn't know what ranked choice voting is. This has always been a very online perspective. Like that, like this has never reached the public imagination because people's engagement with the political is kind of limited for the most part to the presidential, and neither president is out there screaming about this. You know? This is one of the reasons why, genuinely, my logic on the viability of voting in elections has always been more or less the anarchist one, or the Noam Chomsky one, which is, you know, it's important, it's very important, but it's like 10% of the work, you know? I think that a problem with some of the advocacy for ranked choice voting that I've seen is that people think it would solve our problems and wouldn't just be like a marginal expansion of the realm of possibility. You know what I mean? People think like, yeah, okay, ranked choice voting is now on the ticket, and now, congratulations, your socialist third party finally gets a win. Well, no, right? We're still dealing with a country that overwhelmingly votes for only two parties in general. So even if you introduced ranked choice voting, that probably wouldn't change. You have to think of this in I guess, like a broader perspective. I still think it's good to push for. It's just not the be-all, end-all solution that a lot of people want it to be. Really, if you want more like more workability when it comes to moving outside the party duopoly, you got to start at a local level. The Working Families Party. You have to show people that, yeah, third parties can do more, as Herkel says, than do a vanity project every 4 years. Yeah. $110 million. I agree, funny rhetorician. Yeah. People have difficulty imagining anything like possible that's beyond the scope of what they're already familiar with. Either way, the main point here is that we love Bernie. I love my blue checkmark Twitter accounts called Proud Socialist with a Karl Marx icon, power to the people, hammer and sickle dove name. Wonder how much Langley pays them. What are your thoughts on mandatory voting? I'm in favor of it.